Hello and welcome to Ward Hadaway's Fastest 50 podcast, where we shine a spotlight on entrepreneurial success, fast-growing businesses and their role in the regional economy. I'm Alistair McDonald, Business Development Director at Ward Hadaway. I'm joined by my co-host today, Matt Cormack. Say hello, Matt.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Matt Cormack. I'm a partner in our commercial team.
Thanks very much. And our guest today is Steven Forrest, Chief Exec of Forfusion. Forfusion designs, delivers and manages mission-critical IT infrastructure for organisations across the public and private sectors. The business is focused on helping clients drive digital transformation while balancing innovation, security and operational resilience. The business has seen impressive growth, ranked 21st in our 2025 Ward Hadaway Fastest 50 Northeast. Steven, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
We're delighted that you've come along, so thanks very much. If we could start at the beginning. If you could tell us about your journey into technology and what led you to Forfusion.
It's been more incidental than anything else. I had a bit of, let's just say, a poor start at university. Didn't do particularly well. I was a bit of a wayward chap when I was young, so I thought, actually, I'm going to join the armed forces, try and get a bit of direction. Again, nothing to do with technology at all. I decided to join the Royal Engineers to get a trade. A working class lad from Wallsend, I thought, let's give that a go. Next thing you know, I'm in the armed forces and I land a trade. And my first post, and I started designing blast walls to absorb rocket energy. And I also ended up doing a bit of a side job, and that was essentially as a military diver searching for dead bodies. As part of my remit, I was working in a design cell at the time, and they didn't have anybody to look after the computer network. One of the officers came in one day and said, "Does anybody fancy looking after the computer network?" And I said, "I'll give that a go." Yeah. Bearing in mind, I'd had a bit of a false start with my computer studies. I thought, why not give it another go? And that's what I ended up doing. Fast track a few years later, I ended up working for a very large Cisco networking company. And within relative short order, I started designing and architecting some of the largest, most complex networks for large wealth management companies, banks and oil companies. And that laid the foundations to start the business Forfusion.
One of the things that you guys are passionate about is apprenticeships. And I think when you've told me that story before, it's really clear that, both for you and the exec team and people you bring into the business, you look for people with that, desire and that drive, and you're not always looking at, university grads with a first class degree and everything else. So you do a lot with apprenticeships in the business.
I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but it's kind of, to an extent, it's the bedrock of the business. We've got quite a diverse workforce in terms of, kind of political background, educational background, ethnicity, gender. It's a real mixed bag. But one of the things that we've managed to do, regardless of diversity, is to ensure there's a kind of a common goal, a common message. It filters down from the top, but it's also built from the ground up. One of the things we did, and we still do today, is basically launched apprenticeship programs. But we also have fast-track programs to take apprentices through to engineering, through to consultancy, into senior management, and on occasion up to director level as well. I suppose part and parcel of that, we run civilian work attachment schemes. So resettling ex-service personnel. There's huge emphasis, and it has been from the outset, in contributing society. So helping which is the King's Trust now, helping the disadvantaged find roles either in our business or other businesses.
Do you think that's contributed to the success of the business in terms of clear sense of corporate responsibility in terms of recruiting people and clients and all that stuff?
It definitely has. I mean we're incredibly selective about who we employ, and it doesn't mean to say that we want a specific person from a specific background. But that individual's got to have the right qualities from an aptitude and an attitude standpoint. What we really like to do is bring people on as young as possible. Creative people with ambition, allow them to bring fresh ideas to the table that perhaps people that have got 10 or 15, 20 years experience don't have, but also allow them to flourish. I'm from Wallsend. two of the other shareholders that started with me in 2008, 2009. They're from Newcastle as well. So essentially, we want to bring something back to the northeast and help those apprentices flourish.
And we've actually had another couple of tech organisations as guests on the podcast. And I think if you're not from the northeast, you maybe don't realise what a flourishing tech scene there is. And people had to leave to get work and to get good paying jobs. And I think that's changing, definitely. And I think that's something that we need to get the message out there that you by all means, go and travel and go to other places, but you don't have to get a really good paying job, no matter what background you're from. I think that's really, really important. So if a non-technical business leader asked you what problem you solve, how would you describe it?
I'll give you the party line first, and then I'll offer a little bit more context. I mean, essentially, as I mentioned before, my background's designing very large complex networks, mission critical IT infrastructure, typically for mid-market and enterprise clients in the private sector space, and in the public space, defence, government agencies and NHS trusts. So the more complex, the better. So one of the things that we do, and we pride ourselves on, is allow organisations to innovate at pace, but critically also mitigate operational and financial risk as they're innovating. So finding that balance, and that's something that we do really well.
How do you take a client through that and get that balance right? Because I guess, to me, you'd say, well, stability's over here, and then innovation and change are over there. So how do you kind of guide clients through that?
Don't do what the big guys do. I mean, we've laid our own bed to an extent. We've chosen to operate in the mid-market and enterprise space. We're typically competing with organisations, doing many tens or hundreds of millions, sometimes $1 billion in revenue. So we've had to be a little bit more creative.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do 100% of the time, we don't sell features, functions, and benefits from that standpoint. It's about stakeholder engagement, understanding the real problems, not just the technological problems, working with them on a coherent plan, creating a plan that essentially we can digest and we can approach in bite-sized chunks, looking at current state and evaluating what we need to do to get them to a certain place in 4, 5 or 6 years down the line.
I wanted to ask you, Steve, about what changes you've seen in client expectations over the years. So, what are organisations expecting of Forfusion and your services? Aside
from the obvious, when we talk about AI and ML or machine learning, I mean, what we're seeing, and it's been more kind of prevalent over the last sort of 12, 18 months, is lower tolerance for interruption.
Yeah.
And I know it seems like a bit of an obvious thing to say, but, with the advancements of technology, software-defined networking in our case, the ability to automate, in some instances, to remediate problems before they even arise. They want to know about the event. After the event, we need to tell them about the event, but it needs to be seamless to business operations. So that's one of the major changes that we're seeing right across the board is I don't mind knowing after it's happened, I don't want the business to be failing. It's more now about proactive remediation rather than very quick reactive remediation. And that's one of the kind of seismic changes that we're seeing specifically in managed services.
And I guess particularly knowing a bit about your client base with retail, when you look at some of the organisations in retail that have been hit with cyber incidents and other difficulties with network, in that competitive landscape, that can make a huge difference, to that client.
It's, it works hand in hand with security incidents. Again, zero downtime. This comes back to kind of how do we help organisations innovate at pace and mitigate the operational and financial risk.
One of the services you offer is Fusion Care, and I think managed services is more of a thing that people expect. So what do customers value about that particular offer?
I suppose it's aligned with the topic we've just covered. Is the visibility is a big thing now. So to give the client visibility, transparency, so they understand what happened, why it's happened, and how it's being remediated. That's the key driver. As an organisation, we deliver into mid-market enterprise clients, which typically means they've got fairly robust, experienced IT teams. So it's only the really important stuff, the critical stuff, challenges or problems that are escalated that end up in our care. That's what they want to see, that's being dealt with at speed and proactively.
Yeah. I think a lot of the time it's that assurance.
I think clients more so now than ever, they want to be reassured that essentially we're ahead of the market, or at least in line with the market. So if there is change afoot, we're across it and we can communicate that with the clients, and that either directly or indirectly influences how we tailor products and services to deliver for clients.
I think that kind of starts to touch on my next question, which was like, from your point of view, where do you see the market going over the next few years?
It will be primarily focused on, as far as we're concerned, on visibility. Visibility, observability, telemetry, essentially having the data, but having the data presented in a way that can be ingested and understood by the layperson or by business unit owners or directors. So, and the pace of change is such that needs to be almost, and I hate this term, a single pane of glass. One place to look to understand what's going on right across your networking infrastructure, either on-premise or cloud. It's been happening for some time, but in 3, 4, 5 years' time, it's going to be a must-have.
Do you think has that always been the case, or is it more of a recent trend that, this is board level stuff? I guess we talked earlier about incident response. Is it a bigger issue around the board table now than it was when you guys started?
I think one of the the major influencing factors here is that as we experience kind of, I suppose, more challenges in and around skill shortages, more technologies become available, the network becomes much more complex. That further compounds the challenges that we've got with the skills shortage, more specifically in public sector, where you'll have pay bans, for example. They can't employ people with the right skills, and if they do, they don't keep them very long. So what it's done, essentially, it's elevated, I suppose, it to board level, because they don't have sufficient skills at the right levels within the business.
And are those skills shortages something that you see in the private sector as well, or is that specific to the public sector?
We do see it in the private sector, but in the private sector, there's more flexibility in terms of what organisations can pay under what circumstances, and there's a little less in the way of red tape. So obviously, competitive advantage is quite important in the private sector. So you can pay your way into that. Whereas with public sector, obviously you don't want to fall behind, but it's more about safety, security, compliance, adherence to standards.
Well, we want to talk about the fastest 50, don't we? Because we're on the fastest 50 podcast, and Forfusion ranked this year, which was great to see. And we've had a few years where we were almost in the 50, and brilliant to get you guys in. And what do you think the sort of key strategic decisions are that you've made in recent years that have contributed to that growth?
We haven't changed our strategy. We haven't changed the strategic direction of the business. One of the things that we've always been big on, is ensuring the quality of output. We've chosen to, work in complex environments. The more complex, the better, essentially, because that's the way we're geared up to deliver. But this whole quality of output thing can only go so far if the market dictates the big players can use brute force to push you out. Now, what happened when COVID reared its head? An indirect consequence of that was a worldwide silicon shortage. That meant that our competitors, doing hundreds of millions or billions, couldn't use buying power and brute strength to win clients. And that's when we could use creativity, guile, strategic planning and road mapping. And coming out the other side of COVID, that's what turned the taps on, essentially. And it wasn't a change of direction. It was us having the conviction, the strength, the character, if you will, to stick with a plan, stick with a strategy that we'd architected at board level and execute it in its full.
I mean, through that period of fast growth, you've got a brilliant management team, quite a close group of directors and execs. I guess you've also got that extended team through professional advisors that you guys work with. What makes that sort of professional advisory network important, and how can those advisors add value to your business as you're growing?
personally, and I hope I kind of, I'm echoing the thoughts of the board, is we don't look for anything different than when we're engaging or employing senior people within the business.
Mm-hmm.
It's about trust. It's about accountability. There needs to be some humility there, experience, expertise, and what's really important to me, and hopefully the board, organisations and individuals, because I look at it in exactly the same way, they've got to be open to challenge. And I think that's absolutely critical. But what's really important is, they take challenge on board, and also they're prepared to be open to challenge, even if they don't necessarily believe in somebody else's ideas. And I think that's really important for any professional services organisation. I think one of the things that's, that continues to be important for our business is engaging with professional services companies that are at the top of the game. So, and this is, we accept that working with certain professional services, and it's not necessarily the cheapest option. The benefits, if you build the relationship in the right way from the outset, you accept challenge, you're honest, etc., then it can go an awful long way. And that's the way we sell businesses into our clients, kind of land and expand, and do it in the right way.
I think that proper relationship where it's providing the assurance that you're talking about, but also being able to be tested and challenged, then that's the sort of the key ingredient in any relationship there. So that's really interesting. Thanks.
I had one more question on the growth side of things. You've talked about not changing the strategy in terms of that growth. Has the growth typically come from doing more with existing clients, or has it been winning new clients, or a combination?
Our growth has come from either existing clients, as just as I was explaining before, the ability to deliver one service really well on a specific technology or service, and then expanding out. That's a really important area of growth for us. So obviously looking at white space, the next and second best area really is referrals, warm referrals. One client speaking with another client saying, by the way, we had these challenges, these problems. Forfusion came in, did an absolutely fantastic job. We end up working with that client. And obviously that kind of almost compresses the sales cycle for us, which is great. But it means that we're working with a client that automatically trusts us. So we don't necessarily have to go through the whole kind of sales pitch again, and we can just get involved and get on with the stuff that really matters. More recently, we've done a lot more with sales and marketing. We didn't want to be particularly on the front foot with sales and marketing until we started taking some market share, till we started taking on large clients, until we've got the foundational components, a proper board in place, proper structure, proper standards. We've got that in place now, and I think we're onboarding a client every 6 to 8 weeks at the moment, but we've got the foundational components and the platform to allow us to continue, ensuring the quality of output. So every single customer gets a good service, and it's not detrimental if we take on more.
I think when you have businesses that are growing as quickly as yours has, like that sort of chasing the sales and all that kind of stuff does take people's eye off the ball, and then service suffers, and then it doesn't really work for anybody. So it sounds like you're doing that in the right way.
Yeah, and it's taking those time on, because the process stuff isn't that attractive, is it? It's not a big client win. It's not directly onto the bottom line. It's the process that sits underneath it, and certainly from working with you guys, that you have put so much detail into those processes, and then you reap the rewards because, like you say, you've got consistency of it.
One of the things that has slowed us down, and it's potentially more incidental than anything else, is that we ensure we're delivering what we consider to be our commitment into local communities. So that sometimes covers above generating profit. As long as we continue to do that, it can't help but slow us down slightly. We actually think that's a really good thing, because it keeps the employees bought in, it keeps the clients bought in. We avoid any risk of greenwashing. What we say to the outside world we're doing, we're actually doing, and the employees, certainly via the NPS scores that we've received, they really value that.
We've done some of that work on the NPS scores ourselves, and it's absolutely fascinating what comes back. But you're right, you can't, I think sometimes it's a trend to show what you're giving back and all that kind of stuff, and you're doing it genuinely, and I think people understand that. They see through it when it's not genuine. But I didn't expect that would be part of the sort of growth process. So if we could move on to another aspect of the sort of the journey. You've experienced managing acquisitions during your career. What did that teach you about both leadership but risk as well?
I think the two are kind of intertwined in a sense. It's that I suppose it almost kind of supported our core values. You know, we talk a lot about accountability, ownership, transparency, openness. I think any process that involves change, there needs to be a greater degree of openness and transparency. And I mentioned working with clients where you need all the stakeholders on board. Inward looking, it's exactly the same. You need the stakeholders on board, and the stakeholders often are not just board members. You know, it could be line managers, but it may also be influential individuals in the business that are not senior, but they might have put 10 or 15 years effort into helping build the business. It's actually getting those individuals involved in the process and making them feel part of it. And that in itself helps mitigate risk, operational risk and cultural risk, because the last thing you want is for the cultural fabric to get torn because you're not living your values and you're not making it all inclusive.
And actually, because of the people you've got in the business, you talked before about how seriously, rightly so, you take recruitment into the business. You know that every single person in the business is passionate about its growth. So that, I guess, with that comes that requirement for communication. You know, you've not got people coming in thinking, well, I'll sit here 9 to 5. You know, it's just my job. They genuinely care about where the business is going. So
a lot can be said about, obviously, you know, developing or encouraging a certain kind of way of thinking, a way of working, and culture as well. And it's really important when you go through the recruitment process, you're employing people for the right reasons, not just because of their technical capabilities, but what's equally important if you want the business to thrive is that you don't hold on to people that aren't cut from the right cloth. You know, that's a critical thing. And, you know, some people may look at it as kind of hard-nosed business person, a bit cutthroat, but that can be more damaging than any other activity, is allowing somebody that doesn't have the right kind of mindset to remain within the business. So we like to make decisions quick and fast. I mean, we've got one of the lowest attrition rates in industry, both at employee and client level, and we think that's one of the main reasons for it.
So I mean, you've kind of touched on some of this in your answer, but like as organisations grow rapidly, it is hard to maintain that culture of what you were when you set off. So are there any specific things that you've done to maintain that outside the recruitment piece?
I think the biggest challenge that organisations have, especially organisations that champion diversity. So the first thing is encourage diversity, but make sure that diversity isn't destabilising the direction of the business and the kind of core values of the business. That's a very tricky one to manage if you want to be a diverse business. And I suppose the most important thing for us, and as far as the board is concerned, is make sure that quality of output drives and influences absolutely everything. So it's a non-negotiable. If the quality of output is non-negotiable, naturally a solid, coherent culture will follow.
Yeah, and it's emphasising that that's the aim for everybody in the business. Great, that was really good, thanks.
And we touched on this a little bit already with your sort of armed forces background. I'm interested in, whether you think that background has shaped your leadership style and, your approach to resilience and decision making.
I mean, we just kind of wind back the clock to a time when I left uni and decided to join the armed forces. There's no shame in saying and admitting that I was probably quite a selfish person in those days. And this isn't me saying I was selfish then and I'm great now or anything like that. I was pretty self-centered. A lot of the sport that I did, did judo for many years at a good level. I ran a lot, but essentially I tended to choose sports where I could only blame myself if I wasn't successful. Yeah. I joined the army, very, very similar mindset. That soon got kicked out of me, fortunately, actually, and for the greater good. And what that helped me get a real appreciation of, and I'd like to think now it's fairly prominent in some of the leadership decisions that I make, and there's certainly the team that we build, is the need to work as a collective. And that's, heavily influenced the core values of the business and the direction of travel. So I think I'll take that one thing from the armed forces. I mean, Forfusion, the employees, I think 26% of its workforce is ex-services personnel, and we love taking on ex-services personnel for that very reason. It's, you know, when the going gets tough, they tend to be pretty robust, pretty resilient, roll up their sleeves and work together.
That environment that they've been in, where you know you have to operate as a team, don't you? And I mean, you know, you're literally talking about life and death situations there, and if you're not pulling in that direction, you're not pulling in that direction together.
How does that impact the rest of the people who aren't from a forces background? Because I would imagine that is structured and it is following the leadership, but then you've got other people who aren't, and you've talked about everybody's pulling in the same direction around the same goal. So how do you marry those two things together?
I've not been asked that question before, but I think I can answer it hopefully succinctly. I don't know. So essentially, if the two examples I've got there is if we take somebody that comes from university, or somebody that has come from A levels or whatever it is, we've really got to kind of mould them and teach them about teamwork, the values associated with teamwork. It's not all about you, it's about the business, and it's about your team. So there are certain approaches that we've got to take depending on the individual's background. The same goes for the forces. So we don't have to teach them about being regimented, structured, being organised, being robust, teamwork, but what we have got to teach them about is the commercial world. The influence or the type of training that we give to these individuals is really quite different. But one of the advantages of having ex-forces personnel is they come in and they typically take roles on where you need to be process driven. For example, you know, there's a very high proportion of those individuals are project managers, or the work for government agencies where it's, you know, it's quite prescriptive. The working day, and it doesn't necessarily suit every person, but what we'll do is we'll make sure that all training plans are aligned to an individual and their background. It's not generic, and it can't be.
You know, you've talked there about that change in you, where you went from, you know, the sort of the personal ambition to the team ambition, and you know, clearly in your role as chief exec, it's all about team focus. How do you sort of personally balance those two things? Because I know you're personally still ambitious for your personal goals, plus you've got the team goals of the business. How do you balance all those things?
I suppose to an extent it's kind of setting, again, the non-negotiables. So I've got a business, got a young family. Family come first, business comes second, and then training comes third. I think, you know, one of the things that I've been able to do and develop quite well over the years is work to a system. I can quite easily get 2-3 hours training done before the working day starts. That way it doesn't encroach on business. It doesn't encroach on the time I want to spend with my 6-year-old daughter. Exactly the same with the weekends. If I'm going to exercise, I go out very early, and then I've still got the entire weekend. And I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by an unbelievable board. We're a pretty flexible, close-knit bunch, and I think that really helps.
And you talked a little bit about the board there, and you are a very close-knit team. How did you sort of react to being in the fastest 50 as a group? Because I said before, you know, you had a few years where you were like right on the cusp of being there.
The board was delighted, but I think it's other people in the business that were more delighted and felt, you know, with external validation, what they were doing is actually really being valued, and it was really visible. A lot of the people that do a fantastic job for the business, they're not outward facing, they're not salespeople, not necessarily consultants. It's individuals working in the back office, you know, the kind of the oil to the cogs in the engine, if you like. It's those individuals that often work in, to a certain extent, thankless positions, say, that's what I'm contributing towards. So for everybody within the business, I mean, we were delighted. Everybody was delighted. But I think it was also met with a bit of reality as well, because we're never complacent. We don't get carried away. It's 1 year that we chased for multiple years, and hopefully we'll be there again. But as soon as it happened and we celebrated and we shook everyone's hand, it's back to business as usual.
It's on to the next rung on the ladder, isn't it? With what I think that comes across from this conversation and the way that you guys are as a business, but it's nice to see that, even if it's just for the afternoon of the awards, you know, actually you get your team together and pat yourselves on the back and go, yeah, actually, let's pause, just even if just for half a day, we'll pause and we'll just reflect on where we've got to here.
So I wanted to ask, very clearly articulated how you've managed to grow and grow in a successful manner. What advice would you give to other founders who are listening to this about how they would go about doing that themselves?
I think a lot of it comes down to the anticipated rate of growth, because if you want to grow very aggressively without the foundations in place, then it's going to affect the quality of output. I'm not saying it's linear, but if you want to grow at a moderate pace and you haven't got the foundations in place, then obviously the impact's less. My view, our view as a board is, if you want to grow at pace, you want to grow aggressively, is be patient in the early years, get the foundational components in place, a strong team that you trust, similar values. Diversity is a good thing as long as there's a unified and collective goal. Once those foundations are in place, take advantage of the fact that you've got a platform and you can accelerate from there, with the primary focus being quality of output. And I think that's a reasonably good recipe for any business.
Moving forward over the next, say, 2, 3, 5 years, what does success look like for Forfusion? And I'm going to add one in. What does it look like for you personally?
It's a really good question, because we had a really strong year last year. We like to do things in phases and cycles. You can't just continually grow kind of iteratively or incrementally. Then you need to take stock, especially with the advancement of technologies. The fact that you may want to, and we have done, is actually build additional structure at board level, at middle management, because we're at a point now we can scale much more aggressively, but you need to take stock first and make sure the strategy is as robust as the team and as robust as the ideas that we've got. So we've spent the last 9, nearly 10 months doing that now in preparation for much more aggressive scale. So the next 2 or 3 years, we anticipate to grow much more quickly than we have done in the past. But that's owing to the fact that we've got the platform in place.
What about for you personally?
More of the same. If we can continue growing at a similar or faster rate, make sure that the cultural fabric remains intact, continue basically, delivering, offering our support, whether it's financial, whether it's resource, into local communities, supporting things like walking with the wounded, resettling ex-military personnel, bringing apprentices through. If we can continue doing that, as well as generating profit and growing, then I'm a happy guy.
What's absolutely loud and clear with you and with Forfusion is that genuine purpose-driven organisation that is, to me, it sounds like as much about the profit and the growth as it is what you put back into the communities. I think it's fascinating to hear that focus on the community aspect's been something that's actually enabled you to grow successfully and grow in a sustainable manner, which, I just think that's absolutely amazing. And you hear so many people talk about that, but to hear it genuinely be part of the sort of recipe for success with you is amazing. I think the other thing that's just abundantly clear is the absolute laser focus on the outcome and the output, whether that's board level for a client. It's like you've got that laser focus, and that's enabled you to bring people from military backgrounds, non-military backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different social backgrounds, and pull all that together to create a very, very successful business that, yes, generates profits and all that, but employs people and gives them good careers. And also to acknowledge that if there's any threat to that fabric of your organisation, that you've got to act on it. So that's absolutely fascinating from my point of view. If people want to get in touch with you, or if they're keen to hear more about the business, how should they go about doing that?
Certainly LinkedIn, Steven Forrest. I'll be delighted to hear from anybody, any feedback they've got. Forfusion.com, that's the website, but we're always happy to hear from anybody. Thanks very much for your time.
No, thanks very much indeed, and thanks for being my co-host today, Matt.
Absolute pleasure. It's been great.
Really enjoyed that. Thanks very much.